Hi, this is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about the coming end of cash. I think we're rapidly moving toward a society where cash will either be illegal or will lose its usefulness, and this is another way that central bankers and governments are going to steal from us. So you're going to want to make sure you stay tuned and watch this whole thing to the end because you're not going to believe what's in the works. If you're interested in learning how the economy actually works, what's on the horizon, and how to use that to make money for you and your family, be sure to hit that subscribe button. So we're talking about the end of cash, and there's this great saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. I was fascinated by this because we were only a few weeks into the COVID crisis, and I was beginning to see a lot of headlines, various announcements from various governments talking about one of the big problems with cash, that it's so dirty and that we actually need to get rid of it for this reason. I know China was actually collecting their banknotes, their bills, and sterilizing them, etc., which is fairly smart. But a lot of governments also began making this argument, even as people were dying and going on respirators, that we got to get rid of cash. Again, this is the principle, never let a crisis go to waste. So why might governments not like cash? And when we're talking about cash, we're not talking about cash in your savings account, but we're talking about physical cash, bills and coins in your pocket or under your mattress, as we'll see. So cash, obviously, it is dirty. There's this. When I was a kid, I was told that every U.S. $100 bill had traces of cocaine on it. I assume this is probably still true. Governments do not like physical cash because it can be used in transactions to avoid paying taxes. I'll mow your lawn, you pay me in cash. I never report it, etc. I don't recommend this, by the way. It can also be used to preserve privacy. Maybe you don't want Apple and Visa knowing everything that you're buying, and you don't want that in a database. Even if you're not doing anything illegal, maybe you just don't want people knowing what you're doing. And so cash is a nice means of privacy, even if it may occasionally have some viruses or cocaine on it. I think one reason governments don't like cash, which I would agree with, it can be used for terrorism, it can be used for drug trade. This is sort of a subset of the privacy category. I think the privacy uses of cash far outweigh these downside uses. But it is perhaps a legitimate reason that governments don't like cash. Finally, and I'll suggest the main reason that governments don't like cash is because it makes it more difficult for banks and governments and central bankers to steal from you. So let me flesh this out a little bit more. We're looking here at government interest rates in the U.S. This is what's called the Treasury yield curve. So you basically have various maturities from 1 month out to 30 years, and then you have the associated interest rates. So on an annualized basis, the 1 month rate is 0.15%, and to get above a 1% annual interest rate, you have to go actually above 20 years. And if you just be crazy to lock your money up for this long. But this shows you how low nominal interest rates are right now. Now let's talk quickly about this terminology in case you're not familiar with it. A nominal interest rate is just the interest rate that you see. You open up a 2% savings account, that's the nominal interest rate. Now the U.S. Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, has a targeted inflation rate that they try to stick to. And we can be sure that they most of the time are at that inflation rate, if not well above it. But that's a 2% inflation rate. And so if your nominal interest rate, let's say you have a savings account, they don't pay this much anymore, but they used to, a savings account that pays 3% and the inflation rate is 2% because that's what the Fed wants it to be and they're doing their job successfully, stealing from you. The real interest rate will be the nominal rate minus the inflation rate gets you the real interest rate. And so because you're losing 2% to inflation every year, you're making 3%, your real interest rate, what you're actually earning on your money, is 1%. It's actually lower, obviously, because you have to pay taxes. This is what's really unfair. You have to pay taxes on this money that you're earning at 3%, and the government confiscates from you in two ways. They take your money using taxes, and they take your money under the table using inflation. So this would be a positive real interest rate, 1%. Just 3% minus 2% inflation is 1%. Now, what if the nominal interest rate, as it is right now, is fairly low? So in a savings account, maybe you're only earning 0.5% or 0.5% per year. if the inflation rate over a long period of time, right now there are some deflationary pressures, but let's say that you hold this money in your account for 5 years and the inflation rate over those 5 years really averages 2% a year, your real interest rate goes negative. So when we're talking about negative real interest rates, this is what we're doing. We're saying the nominal rate minus inflation gets you a negative rate. So this is terrible because you're paying taxes on this 0.5% on your interest income, you're being confiscated by inflation, and your wealth is being destroyed at an annual rate of 1.5%. That might not sound like much, but over 10 years it would be about 15%. Over 20 years it would be about 30%. And this is for someone who's worked hard, paid paid taxes on their earnings, and is just trying to save for retirement or save for their children. So right now we already have negative real interest rates. And as I said, this steals from savers. So let's think about how central bank policy works in conjunction with this. So when your bank lowers your interest rate, let's say on your savings account from 2% to 0.3%, you may move some of that money into the stock market. Maybe you start buying some dividend stocks, as we've been doing at Trader University, or you may maybe move some of that money. You may buy a rental, or you may just spend it because you think, well, I'm not earning any interest on it. I'm just going to buy a new car with the money anyway. Probably not a good decision because the car will depreciate even faster. But this is the psychology involved. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I remember earning 5 to 6% in my savings account. And that kind of higher interest rate, even with the inflation, there was still a very positive real interest rate. And that does encourage savings. Now, when your bank lowers your interest rate from 2% to close to zero, you may move some of the money out of the bank account, but you'll probably still leave some money there. Now, what happens when we get very low nominal interest rates? When your bank lowers your interest rate, as may happen over the next couple of years, from 0.3%, this is already happening in parts of Europe, to minus 5%, you pull your money out of the bank and keep it under your mattress. Because if you have $100 at the start of the year in a bank with a negative interest rate of 5%, at the end of the year, you'll have $95 in your account. There's no point keeping your money in a bank if it's slowly disappearing. You much rather spend it, which stimulates the economy, quote unquote stimulates the economy. This is what the central banks want. This is one of the incentives involved. Or maybe you move your money into the stock market as well. But so the problem is, it's very difficult for central banks to force everyone to accept negative nominal interest rates. Negative real interest rates are a little more sneaky. Maybe people don't see it. But at a negative nominal interest rate of minus 5% and you have an inflation rate of 2%, your real interest rate is minus 7%. And even if you're not aware of inflation, you see that you're earning minus 5% in your bank account. So you pull the money out and keep it in your mattress. Now, not only do individuals and households do this, but commercial banks do this as well. And so commercial banks will choose to hold less cash, in particular, at central banks. Especially if government securities have negative interest rates, they won't want to hold as many of those, like treasuries, as we saw. And so you get more cash ending up in bank vaults. So you have this mattress problem, I'll call it, where when nominal interest rates go really negative, everyone takes their money out of the banks, and there's basically a run on the banks. The banks get defunded. You can imagine just how crazy that would be if all the monies get sucked out of the banks. And so this makes it impossible or very difficult under the current system for the central bank to enforce these kind of negative nominal interest rates. But that doesn't stop economists like Ken Rogoff, central bankers, and other evil people who spend their time trying to prop up the current fiat system by stealing from productive citizens and from savers. I'll link to this paper, The Case for Deeply Negative Interest Rates. This was published just in May of this year. There's also a paper that I'll be drawing some ideas from that was published by the IMF, Enabling Deep Negative Interest Rates to Fight Recessions. This was interesting because it basically argues that the lower, basically 0% interest rates, what they call the lower bound, the zero lower bound, is not a law of nature. It is a policy choice. So they've come up with lots of sneaky and evil ways to force you to accept deep negative interest rates, by which we would mean maybe 5 to 10%. I think Ken Rogoff often cites -6% as a way of stimulating the economy. So let's go a little bit into this paper, and I'll link to the paper itself, and we'll see the methods they're going to use. And this is one of the reasons we're talking about the end of cash. So how can you make people, if interest rates go negative, people pull their money out of the banks. So how can evil governments and central banks enforce negative interest rates? Well, what they can do, I'm going to give you a couple scenarios here. They can declare that non-cash digital money, in other words, sort of zeros and ones that you have in your bank account, they can declare that that is real money, and that real cash is sort of a second-class citizen. So the bills and coins you have in your pocket or under your mattress are less desirable. They're second-class citizens. And so they could basically pass a law. The central bank, the Fed, could tell Congress to pass a law that, for example, at the grocery store, if you pay with your credit card, if you pay with Apple Pay, a carton of milk will be $3 if you pay with digital money. But if you pay with cash, there'll be a surcharge. So a carton of milk will be $3 with digital money, but $3.30 if you pay with dirty cash out of your pocket. And this surcharge would basically be the equivalent of a negative interest rate, and it would be set by the central bank. In this case, it's approximately equivalent to a 10% negative interest rate. If you think this is far-fetched, I think you'll be unpleasantly surprised we're going to see happen over the next few years. Here's some other options, and I'm taking all these options from this IMF working paper. This is not some crazy conspiracy theory. This is an actual intergovernmental agency, International Monetary Fund, and these are their policy proposals. So here's another proposal. We had the pay surcharge if you pay with cash. Here's another one. If you're going to use cash, you have to pay a rental fee to your bank or to the central bank. This rental fee will be set at a percentage that is equal to the same negative interest rate that is applied to digital deposits at the bank. So if you leave your $100,000 in your savings account, you'll be earning -5% on it per year. If you try to pull it out, they will charge you a rental rate. So you decide to pull out that $100,000, stick under your mattress, and they'll say, well, that's fine, but you can only pull out, let's say you can only pull out $70,000, and we're going to charge you 5% a year to hold that cash. Once you return the cash, you don't have to pay a rental fee anymore. So this would be another proposal that's in that paper. As part of it, limit cash withdrawals from banks. This is part of various versions of this. But what happens then is that if you make cash more valuable like this, cash begins to trade at a premium to digital money. And so whenever you want to convert your digital money, your savings account money or checking account money, to physical cash, you will lose purchasing power. Because let's say a dollar in the bank account is worth $1, but physical cash trades at a premium, so you'll need to pay maybe $1.05 or $1.10 of digital cash to get that physical cash. So that's another policy that's in here. The other thing they could do is simply just ban holding cash. Just like when you're going from country to country, there's certain limits how much money you can take on an airplane or take on a boat and move from one country to another. This is obviously to prevent money laundering, the drug trade, etc. But it's also just another way that governments control honest citizens. So they could just pass a law. Congress could pass a law saying that it's illegal to hold more than $5,000 in cash in your house. And maybe if you're a supermarket, you can hold $50,000 in cash, but there'd be certain limits. And so this would, if the governmental authorities thought that you were holding more than $5,000 in cash, it'd be equivalent to having cocaine in your basement. They would have the right to come in and search your house, etc. Another proposal that I think Rogoff has made is just get rid of banknotes, get rid of paper money, and just allow coins. And this would basically frustrate everything because the coins, especially in the U.S., or at least in the U.S., have become almost negligible. If you see a penny on the ground, when I was a kid, everyone used to still pick those up. Now you probably don't even pick up a quarter because you're afraid it might have COVID on it or something. So it's very hard to move money around if you're just dealing with dimes and nickels and quarters and maybe half dollars, though most of those have been sucked out of the system simply because they have actual money in them called silver. So this would be another way of enforcing negative interest rates. You'd have to keep your money at the bank and have it slowly destroyed by negative interest rates because you're not allowed to hold a certain amount of cash, either as a household or a business. Now, what does this mean for things like gold and Bitcoin? Well, one way to think about it is in terms of the opportunity cost. So back in the early 2000s, late 90s, when you could make 5% in your savings account, gold did not seem quite that interesting because there was a, and ironically, this was when gold really bottomed in 99 and 2000. But gold, there's a real opportunity cost back then to holding gold because if you did nothing, you made a nominal 5% on your money. If you put it into gold, you were already essentially 5% down because of the opportunity cost. You're missing out on earning that 5% if you left it in the savings account. Now, this is the psychology when interest rates are between, call it 1 and 5%. When you're earning 0% on your money, or when you're earning a negative percent, when you're actually paying your bank to hold money in your savings account, there's no longer this opportunity cost associated with holding gold or Bitcoin or other scarce assets. As a result, gold has historically done really well when you have negative real interest rates. And you can only imagine if we get negative nominal interest rates, which would mean even more negative real interest rates. This is one reason that gold's been one of the great performing assets of 2020 as we move toward much lower interest rates. And this is another reason that Bitcoin has been outperforming, actually outperforming gold. So what about the end of cash in the year 2025? Well, these are I have a list of countries here and what percentage of their transactions are done in cash. It looks like the numbers I could pull up. South Korea currently has the fewest number of transactions done in cash. Obviously, countries like Japan and South Korea, there's even more smartphone usage than in the US. People pay for everything using their phones or credit cards, and so only 14% of transactions in South Korea are in cash. Sweden is also extremely low, 20%. US is 32%. Then you have countries like Greece, Cyprus, which most of their transactions are done in cash. And there are historical reasons for this. Maybe not as many people have iPhones and Apple Pay, but there's also this precedent of banks stealing from people. This happened in Cyprus in 2013, where they did what's called a bail-in, where they basically said if you have a certain amount of money in your savings account at a bank in Cyprus, you can only take, if you have $1 million there, you only get $970,000 back, or whatever the actual number was. So banks actually confiscated people's savings. So if you live in a country like that, it's quite understandable that you would want to hold a lot of cash and just keep cash under your mattress rather than keeping it in a bank and risking it being stolen from you if there's a banking crisis and if they do a bail-in. So Sweden is saying that by 2025, they will be a completely cashless society. Now, this is always sold as being, look how wonderful this is. It's very clean. It's much, you're not going to get COVID from touching your smartphone versus touching dirty cash. It's so technologically advanced, and these are both true things. But what I'm suggesting in this video is that central bankers want even more control over your life. They want to be able to force you to do what they want with your money. They want you to force you to put it into the stock market or force you to spend it whenever they want by enforcing deeply negative interest rates. Again, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is Ken Rogoff, who's at Harvard, I believe, actually publishing this, and the IMF publishing it. So the two groups that are really at the heart of our current financial system saying that this is where we need to move. And so I would suggest that a cashless society is coming to you more quickly than you may like. I often get the critique in a lot of my videos about Bitcoin saying that governments are going to come out with their own crypto, and why would anyone hold Bitcoin instead of holding a government crypto? Well, would you want to hold, we'll call it Fedcoin, that's the sort of the meme term for a government crypto or central bank digital currency. Would you like to hold Fedcoin, where they confiscate 2% from you every year, or do you want to hold gold or Bitcoin? If cash is made illegal or cash disappears, you won't be able to hold that. So you're going to have to hold your wealth in something. Whether you have a lot of wealth or whether you have just a little bit of wealth, you will no longer be able to hold it in cash or in a savings account without having it be confiscated. And at this point, one has to look very strongly at stocks, at rental real estate, at gold, and also at Bitcoin. And Bitcoin does make quite a bit of sense in this environment where cash becomes illegal or disappears, and you begin to need to move cash across national borders, international borders, and it's much easier, obviously, to move Bitcoin than it is to move gold, though gold is still a good alternative. If you want to learn more about government crypto or central bank digital currencies, I will link to this video in the description notes below. Hit that subscribe and like button if you found this useful, and let me know your questions and comments in the comments section below. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.